She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She didn't even raise her eyes. Just stood there calm, quiet, and still as two TSA agents escorted her away from the first-class boarding lane. Her hoodie was clean, her boarding pass was valid, and her record was spotless. But none of that mattered, because in their eyes, she was just a black woman in the wrong line, too casual, too silent, too out of place. They didn't ask why she was flying first class. They didn't notice the sealed legal envelope in her bag. They didn't wonder why she wasn't surprised when they pulled her aside, because they'd already decided who she was. But what they didn't know is that the woman they just humiliated wasn't trying to get to a vacation. She was there to test something, to observe, to see how this airline treats people who don't look like the boardroom. And when they failed that test, she didn't post a video, didn't file a lawsuit. She just walked into a conference room later that day and with one signature, shut down the biggest merger in the company's history, not out of revenge, but out of principle. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes silence is strategy. And sometimes the person you dismiss in the hoodie is the one who writes the ending of your story. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You ever seen someone walk through a crowd so quietly, the world just parts around them, not out of fear, not even out of respect, but because people don't see what they don't expect to see? That was Simone Carter. It was 5:26 a.m. at the Denver International Airport. The terminal buzzed with the early morning chaos, families juggling strollers and coffee cups, business types tapping at their phones like the world depended on their thumbs, and gate agents already on their third shift smile. And there she was. Simone stood near the corner of Terminal B, blending in and standing out all at once. She wore a dark gray hoodie faded, no logo pulled up just enough to shadow her eyes, loose black jeans, scuffed white sneakers, a canvas tote slung over her shoulder, heavy with paper, no rolling luggage, no flashy jewelry, no brand names to scream value. And yet, the barcode on her phone said priority boarding, first class, seat 1C. She didn't look around, didn't scan for recognition. She just waited, still, silent, like someone trained not to need validation. But silence unsettles people who expect noise and peace. It threatens those who survive on assumptions. Gate Agent 1, Kevin, noticed her before she even moved. He didn't know why she stood out. Maybe it was the way she kept to herself. Maybe it was the way she didn't fidget like the others. Maybe it was because he didn't expect someone who looked like her to be flying that seat. He called over his shoulder without even looking up. "This line's for executive and platinum." "Ma'am," he said, polite on the surface but already judging underneath. Simone didn't flinch. She raised her phone. The digital boarding pass lit up. Kevin scanned it. A beep confirmed what her presence had already challenged. First class, TSA early boarding. All legit. He blinked, then nodded stiffly. "Right, you're good to go." But the pause, the beat of silence that passed between scan and acceptance, it said everything. She stepped forward, and as she passed, Kevin muttered under his breath, "Didn't know Southwest started offering first class." The agent next to him chuckled. Simone kept walking, didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't give them the satisfaction. At security, it happened again. Her hoodie was flagged for a random screening. Never mind the pre-check clearance glowing green on the monitor. Never mind the passengers before her breezing through with bigger bags and bulkier coats. A TSA agent motioned her to the side. "Just a quick additional check." He mumbled. They opened her tote bag, pawed through her belongings like she owed them transparency. Travel-sized lotion, a book, The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. A red folder with string ties. The agent paused. "What's this private documents?" Simone answered. "You a lawyer or something?" "Something like that." The agent frowned but said nothing else. He waved her through. Behind her, a white man in a Patagonia vest brushed past security with a to-go coffee and a Bluetooth earpiece. Untouched. No check. No pause. Simone didn't blink. She'd seen it all before. Knew the choreography by heart. She arrived at Gate B17 with 20 minutes to spare, sat in the far corner of the waiting area, legs crossed, toed at her feet, didn't scroll, didn't plug in earbuds, just sat still. From the outside, she looked like someone passing time. But inside that red folder was a voting contract, one that would decide the fate of a pending $4 billion airline merger. And she, Simone Carter, was the final signatory, the tiebreaker. The independent vote sent by the trust that owned a third of the shares. They called her the Quiet Arm. No one knew her name, but her signature could bring a company to its knees. She took a deep breath, let it out slowly. A child in a nearby stroller stared at her. Simone smiled gently. The mother pulled the stroller away without making eye contact. Simone didn't stop smiling, just leaned back in her chair. She didn't come here to make friends. She came here for clarity. Before you move to segment 1, part 2, just remember, she wasn't trying to be invisible. She just knew how dangerous it was to be seen. And this morning they were about to see her very clearly, whether they were ready or not. The boarding call came like clockwork. First-class passengers on Flight 882 to Seattle may begin boarding at Gate B17. Simone Carter stood. No rush, no pause. She moved like someone who wasn't afraid of being late, because she'd never been late to a single thing that mattered. As she approached the gate, the agent behind the counter, young, bright-eyed, fresh from customer service training, froze for a split second. Her eyes flicked from Simone's hoodie to the name on the boarding pass, then to the seat number, Seat 1C. A small, almost imperceptible wince crossed her face, and in that moment, the world shifted ever so slightly. "Boarding pass, please," she said. Tight smile in place, Simone handed over her phone. Beep. Verified. But then, a pause. The agent leaned to the side and whispered something to the man standing behind her. A shift supervisor. He wore the kind of authority that came with too many years in the same blazer. He squinted, nodded, and took a step forward. "Ma'am, we're going to ask you to wait just a moment," he said, not unkindly, but with that practiced tone people use when they're trying not to sound like they're accusing you of something. "Is there a problem?" Simone asked. Calm. "No, no," he said quickly. "Just need to verify something with the manifest, standard protocol." It wasn't. It never was. The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was loud. Passengers behind her didn't say anything, but they looked at the hoodie, looked at the skin, looked at each other. You could feel the judgment in their eyebrows. A man in a business suit stepped around her and presented his boarding pass. No pause, no whisper, no verification. He walked through without a glance back. Simone stood still, didn't ask again, didn't argue, just waited. And the longer she waited, the more uneasy they became. Security didn't come in fast. They walked, slow and steady. 2 officers, 1 male, 1 female, smiles on the surface, hands near their belts. The female officer spoke first. "Excuse me, ma'am, we're going to need to speak with you off to the side." No reason, no explanation. Simone looked from them to the gate agent, then to the supervisor, and then she nodded. Didn't protest, didn't raise her voice, just picked up her tote and followed. They walked her down the hall, away from the gate, into a quiet room marked secondary screening. The walls were gray, the chairs metal, no windows, no clock, just a few questions. The officer said, her tone light too light, about what Simone asked. Steady. "We received a report of unusual behavior No one's in trouble, just being cautious. You understand. She didn't nod, didn't smile, just watch them. The male officer gestured to her bag. Do you mind if we take a look? She didn't resist. She opened the tote, showed them the contents, book, notebook, a sealed red folder with legal markings, and her wallet. The woman officer reached for the folder. What's this? Simone raised an eyebrow. Confidential documents. She said, legal documents in a manner of speaking. The officer opened it anyway, thumbed through the first page. It meant nothing to her. High-level corporate language, legal terms, vote references, trust fund signatures. She shrugged and handed it back. You can go ahead and rejoin the gate now, the male officer said, but the tone had changed. Tight, awkward, like they weren't sure if they just made a mistake, but knew they wouldn't admit it either way. Simone stood, picked up her tote, didn't say a word. Back at the gate, the flight was closing. The final group was already on board. The agent's eyes widened when she saw Simone return. You, still want to board? Simone stared at her for a long second. No, she said, then turned around and walked away. The agent blinked, didn't stop her, didn't call after her, and just like that, Simone disappeared into the terminal crowd, like smoke, like memory. 35 minutes later, Flight 8 SRD-2 took off without her, but it also took off without its future because the person they just pushed out of line was never really there to fly. She was there to watch, to test, to verify exactly what she had long suspected, that when you look a certain way, no amount of money, power, or planning can protect you from prejudice, unless you're the one writing the checks. Some people walk away from moments like that feeling broken, humiliated, diminished, but not Simone Carter. She didn't walk out of that terminal with her head down. She didn't storm out either. She just moved, deliberate, unshaken, as if the real event hadn't even started yet. Because for Simone, that morning wasn't the destination. It was a data point, the final piece of evidence she needed. The last box to check on a list they didn't even know they were being graded on. She took a cab downtown, didn't book a hotel, didn't text anyone, just walked into a nondescript glass building, past a front desk where no one asked questions. She didn't need clearance. She already had it. 30 floors up. A boardroom buzzed with nervous energy. Inside were 7 people, all waiting for one. They wore suits that cost more than her rent, checked their watches like they meant something, tapped pens, whispered, paced. A presentation was already loaded on the screen. Slide 1, proposed merger, final vote at the head of the table. A man named Jonathan Wexler straightened his tie. He was the face of the investment firm Gray Temples. Firm handshake. MBA from somewhere that mattered to people like him. He turned to the others. She should have landed by now. Someone else checked their phone. No message. Another frown. You think she backed out? Wexler exhaled. She wouldn't. Not after 3 years. But even as he said it, doubt crept into his voice. That's when the door opened, and Simone walked in, hoodie still on, tote still in hand. The room fell silent. No one rose to greet her. No one knew what to say, because in this space, people wore tailored jackets and sharp heels, not hoodies, not sneakers. Simone didn't care. She took her seat at the far end of the table, didn't smile, didn't scowl, just opened the red folder and laid it on the table. Well, Wexler asked, almost whispering. Simone looked up slowly. I flew the route, she said. I followed every instruction, every checkpoint, every gate, and she closed the folder. Everything I needed to confirm has been confirmed. Wexler leaned in. So are we green? A long pause. Simone's fingers tapped the folder once, then stilled. No, she said. One word. Quiet, final. Wexler blinked. I'm sorry. No, as in I'm voting against the merger. Mouths opened around the room. One man coughed. A woman dropped her pen. Simone, Wexler said, sitting up straighter. We're talking about a deal that restructures regional air transport across the Western Corridor. $4 billion in valuation, dozens of job sectors, thousands of shareholders. I know, she replied. That's why I went in person. He tried to laugh it off. So you had a bad flight experience and that's enough to derail. I didn't have a bad flight, she interrupted, her voice still even. I wasn't allowed on the flight. The room froze. You're saying they denied you? They profiled me. Simone said simply, no due cause, no reason. They saw a black woman in a hoodie and made a judgment. The youngest guy in the room tried to pivot. Well, that's unfortunate, obviously, but it's anecdotal. It doesn't reflect systemic. I was sent as a proxy for a voting trust holding 1/3 of this company's shares. She cut in. If they treat that person like a threat, what do you think they're doing to their everyday customers? The silence said everything. Simone stood, gathered her folder, looked around the table. You wanted my signature. You thought it would be easy. Quiet, rubber stamp. She paused. But here's the thing. They judged the hoodie. They dismissed the silence. And they forgot who owned the pen. Then she turned to Wexler. You're going to have a lot of calls to make. She walked to the door. No one stopped her. Because when real power walks out of the room wearing sneakers, it doesn't slam the door. It leaves it wide open, so everyone can feel the draft. The boardroom never recovered, not from Simone's refusal, not from the way she delivered it, not from the silence she left behind. Because what happened next wasn't an explosion. It was something colder, sharper. Corporate backlash doesn't yell, it recalculates. By Tuesday morning, Wexler's team sent out emergency memos, damage control, strategic delays, talking points for stakeholders. But you can't draft your way out of truth, especially when it wears a hoodie and walks out without a word. The airline's internal communication system lit up before sunrise. Executives in New York, legal teams in Atlanta, board advisors in LA. Every one of them wanted to know the same thing. Who is Simone Carter? They ran her name through databases. Nothing came up. Not because she didn't exist, but because she existed exactly how she chose to, behind the curtain. No LinkedIn, no press, no social trail. Just a long paper trail of legal representation, one trust, 6 holding companies, and a voting clause with teeth. She'd been watching this airline for 3 years. Not because she was an activist, not because she had a vendetta, but because the family trust she represented had one question. Would this company survive under pressure? And now they had their answer. Wednesday came with a chill, not just outside, but in the tone of every leadership meeting. The CFO canceled his flight to London. The VP of Compliance called a 7 a.m. all hands. And behind closed doors, the CEO made a quiet request. Find out what happened at that gate and don't let it happen again. But it already had. The incident wasn't isolated. Simone had just been the wrong person to pull from line because she'd been sent to be pulled. That was the test. A trap. Really? And they walked right into it. Then the first leak hit. A junior analyst panicked and under pressure forwarded a redacted internal email chain to the wrong contact. It ended up in the inbox of a journalist from the Equity Post. Subject line: passenger profiling allegations, Denver terminal. And just like that, the quiet started to crack. On Thursday, the headline dropped: first class passenger denied boarding. Was she targeted? The article didn't name Simone, didn't mention the vote, but it described the woman, the hoodie, the red folder, the silence, and that was enough. Social media did the rest. People reposted the headline with one sentence over and over again. We've seen this before, because they had, at coffee shops, in stores, at schools, in boardrooms. People saw themselves in her. The airline tried to contain it, issued a soft, generic statement. We take all reports seriously and are reviewing the matter thoroughly, but it was too late because it wasn't just about Simone anymore. It was about every person who had ever been told, you don't belong here. You're in the wrong line. Are you sure that seat's yours? Meanwhile, Simone said nothing. No interviews, no tweets, no press tour. She wasn't interested in telling the story because the story told itself. Instead, she sat at a small cafe in Seattle's Capitol Hill, laptop open, notes organized, schedule cleared. She wasn't hiding, she was preparing because the trust board had just requested an emergency session. They wanted to reevaluate not just the airline, but the entire transportation investment portfolio, and they wanted her to lead it. Across the country, the executive team at the airline was imploding. The head of PR was forced to cancel a family trip to Lake Tahoe. She spent 12 hours in a fluorescent-lit war room, rewriting statements that would never go out because nothing sounded right anymore. Nothing sounded human. The legal team scrambled to locate any prior claims of racial profiling in their terminals. They found 6, buried in arbitration files, each marked resolved, each paid out quietly. Now they weren't resolved. Now they were evidence. The first real panic came Friday. That's when a mid-level shareholder sent an email CCing multiple board members. If the person we profiled was a major investor, are we legally exposed? No one had an answer because no one had asked that question before. They had always assumed investors looked a certain way, dressed a certain way, spoke a certain way. Not this time. This time, the investor wore a hoodie and smiled when they pulled her out of line. Friday afternoon, the storm moved from whispers to headlines. A second article dropped this time in The Intersect, a business media hybrid that played both sides of the cultural aisle. The title was short, sharp, and dangerous. $400 billion merger delayed after incident at Denver terminal. Here's what we know. This time, Simone Carter's name wasn't just mentioned, it was confirmed, sourced by anonymous investors close to the trust. And that changed everything. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a power broker, a decision maker. The internet lit up. LinkedIn threads turned into battlegrounds. Business podcasts dropped emergency episodes. Commentators called it the most expensive misstep in aviation history, and still through it all, Simone stayed silent. No press release, no apology demanded, no TED Talk style clapback. Just stillness. And that's what scared them the most. By Saturday morning, Simone Carter was trending not because she tweeted, but because people filled in the blanks. One viral post read, "She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she didn't sue, she just said no, and they lost $4 billion." The comments were brutal. They pulled a billionaire off the flight and didn't know it. Imagine being so racist you forget to read the boarding pass. This is why black silence scares them more than black protest. The meme cycle started fast. A photo of Rosa Parks digitally edited into a first-class seat beside Simone. A gif of a boarding gate with the words "security just lost us our merger." Even celebrities started chiming in. An actress with 8 million followers posted, "Dear black women, never doubt the power of your stillness." The CEO of the airline issued a late-night letter to shareholders. It began with the words, "We deeply regret what occurred." But it was too little, too late. Because the damage wasn't just about image, it was about leverage. And right now, Simone Carter held all of it. Inside the trust board, the air grew thick. These weren't people used to losing deals. They were men and women who built empires off closed doors and quiet signatures. And yet they were all listening to her now. Simone didn't raise her voice in the emergency session. She didn't need to. She clicked through a 5-slide presentation, black background, white text, no fluff. Slide 1: culture is a risk variable. Slide 2, bias in boarding, bias in operations. Slide 3, discrimination is expensive. Slide 4, you asked for clarity, this is it. Slide 5, we walk away. There was no vote, no argument. The trust followed her recommendation unanimously. One man leaned forward after the session and said, "You just taught an entire industry a new kind of math." Simone didn't smile. She just replied, "It was always there. You just weren't doing the equation right." Meanwhile, the airline's internal chaos turned desperate. Someone floated the idea of offering Simone a seat on the board. Another said they should issue a formal apology directly to her and make it public. A third suggested a diversity audit to show they were taking it seriously. None of it landed, because by then, another story had broken. One of the 6 former passengers who'd quietly settled racial discrimination cases, she went public. Her name was Darlene James. She posted a 4-minute video from her car, told her story, described how she'd been profiled 2 years earlier at the same terminal. Her closing words: "They tried to silence me with a check. Didn't work. I'm not quiet anymore." The video hit 1 million views in 12 hours. Then 2 more passengers came forward, then a former gate agent, then a pilot. Suddenly, it wasn't about Simone. It was about patterns, a system, a culture that had been ignored until someone powerful finally said enough. Sunday evening, a private investigator hired by the airline submitted a report. It was meant to identify where the breakdown happened. Who made the decision to pull Simone? What line of communication failed? But the conclusion was damning. There was no breakdown. The system worked exactly as it was trained to. That line leaked. It was screenshotted. It went viral. And once again, Simone said nothing. She was spotted briefly that day at a small Black-owned bookstore in Seattle's Central District, browsing titles, wearing the same hoodie, no entourage, no security. Just existing, and that existence, that presence. It was louder than any press conference. By Monday morning, the world finally caught up to the silence Simone Carter had left behind. What began as an internal error had become a full-blown corporate crisis. The airline stock had dropped 9 points over the weekend. Media speculation replaced investor confidence, and board members, some of whom didn't even know her name a week ago, were now demanding answers with shaky voices and sleepless eyes. The $4 billion merger they'd once considered inevitable, now it was unraveling thread by thread, and the final tug was coming. Simone spent that morning the same way she spent most of her mornings: unbothered, focused, and fully aware. She wasn't hiding from headlines. She just didn't need them. At 7:30 a.m., she sat in a modest private office space 3 blocks from Pike Place Market in Seattle. Not a skyscraper, not a suite, just clean glass walls and quiet. She wore the same hoodie from Denver, same soft black joggers. A cup of black coffee sat next to her laptop, untouched. On the screen was the agenda for the Trust Board's emergency vote. One item, one motion, one signature required to bury the deal for good. She already knew how she would vote, but she wasn't rushing, because timing wasn't just a tactic, it was leverage. Meanwhile, in New York, panic took hold. The airline's CEO, Brent Caulfield, was on the 47th floor of their headquarters, pacing in a circle like a man trying to find the exit to a locked room. His general counsel had printed off dozens of pages from social media comments, headlines, screenshots of Simone's public record. "Why didn't we know she was a voting proxy?" he barked. No one answered, because the truth was they'd never asked. They never looked past the surface. A black woman in a hoodie didn't fit the image of someone who could pull the financial plug on their entire strategy. Now, they were finding out just how much power and misjudged silence could hold. At 10:14 a.m., the final board meeting commenced. Simone entered a virtual conference, camera off. Mic muted. She listened first. Executives spoke in rehearsed tones. spinning future value and regret like a sales pitch to a ghost. One member tried to appeal to empathy. Another leaned into fear. If we walk away from this deal, we're talking hundreds of jobs, entire networks of infrastructure. Simone unmuted her mic. Her voice was calm, measured, and unmistakably clear. You mean the jobs you're leveraging as cover for unchecked culture silence? Because I didn't pull the deal to punish anyone. I pulled it because your system reacted exactly how it was built to react. I was there to test it, and it failed. Another pause. Then the chairwoman asked gently, "Do you stand by your vote?" Simone didn't flinch. "I do." And just like that, it was done. At 11:03 a.m., the trust officially released a public notice. After careful consideration and first-hand observation of operational practices, we are withdrawing from the proposed merger with immediate effect. The language was clinical, neutral, precise, but the markets understood it for what it was: a full-blown rejection by noon. Financial analysts across the country were live on air, scrambling for answers. One host on CNBC held up a tablet displaying Simone's quote from a leaked internal memo. "Bias is more than behavior. It's baked into the process. And we don't fund broken systems." Another anchor read the quote aloud, then whispered, "Wow," like it was a sermon. In response, the airline issued a press conference at 1:30 p.m. Caulfield stood stiffly at the podium, a pale blue backdrop behind him stamped with the company's logo. He began with the standard apologies: unfortunate incident, committed to growth, respect for all travelers, but he never said her name, and the crowd noticed. A reporter from the Equity Post raised her hand. "Mr. Caulfield, why hasn't Simone Carter received a direct apology?" He blinked, then lied. "We're in private communication." They weren't, because Simone was watching the live stream from her office, earbuds in, notebook open, and when she heard those words, she simply closed her laptop, still silent, still powerful, still in control. That night, the final blow landed. A respected financial newsletter released an in-depth breakdown of the failed merger. Its title, "The Hoodie Clause: How One Black Woman Rewrote the Rules Without Raising Her Voice." It detailed everything: the vote, the gate incident, the aftermath. It called her the most strategic silence in corporate history and concluded with a line that would be quoted for years. Simone Carter didn't cancel the deal. She held up a mirror, and the industry canceled itself. When the truth makes people uncomfortable, they don't correct it, they try to control it. And that's exactly what the airline tried to do. Because after the stock drop, after the trust pulled their investment, after Simone Carter's name became a quiet anthem for corporate accountability, they realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a story. And they weren't the ones telling it anymore. So they came up with a plan, a press strategy, a damage control campaign dressed up as inclusion. They didn't want justice. They wanted credit for fixing something they still didn't understand. On Wednesday, they sent out a company-wide email in honor of equity, growth, and reflection. "We're excited to launch a new campaign, Faces of Flight, a celebration of our diverse travelers." It was polished, professional, soulless. There was no apology, no mention of Denver, no acknowledgement of the incident that cost them everything. But buried at the bottom of the memo, below a stock photo of smiling passengers, was a quiet bombshell. "We are proud to feature Seattle-based executive Simone Carter in our upcoming campaign rollout." No one had asked her. Simone found out the same way everyone else did, on her phone, through a flood of notifications and messages from people asking, "Wait, you're doing PR for them now?" She stared at the press kit, her photo, her name, a quote she never gave. It read, "Progress isn't easy, but it's possible when we all take flight together. Simone Carter." She didn't scream, didn't rage. She just closed her phone and whispered to herself, so we've reached that part of the story. The campaign launched the next day, digital billboards, in-terminal posters, a polished 60-second commercial running on every screen in every airport they touched. It showed smiling flight attendants, kids in headphones, an elderly couple boarding with assistants, and right in the middle of it, a still image of Simone in her hoodie, head slightly turned, lips neutral, no context, no voiceover, just a title across the bottom. Every seat tells a story. It was elegant, manipulative, aesthetic gaslighting at scale. They tried to repackage her resistance into representation, tried to soften the sharp edges of her silence, tried to turn a $4 billion reckoning into brand optics. But the public didn't buy it. Twitter exploded. Did they really just co-opt Simone's likeness to sell seats after humiliating her? This is what they do. Turn black pain into black participation. Without consent, a side-by-side post went viral. Left side Simone's airport surveillance, still from the Denver incident. Right side the campaign photo. Captioned before and after they found out who she was. The backlash was instant and furious. Influencers, journalists, everyday travelers. People started canceling flights, posting screenshots of deleted bookings, hashtag not in my name. Simone still said nothing, but this time, silence wasn't strategy, it was boiling. Inside the airline's PR team, panic spread like fire in a paper warehouse. Calls were made, lawyers were looped in, meetings ran late into the night. Who approved this one? Exec barked. It came from the top. Someone answered, and that's when they realized they had a bigger problem, because they didn't just misread the public. They'd committed a legal mistake. Simone Carter hadn't signed a release, hadn't given permission, hadn't agreed to be part of the campaign. They'd used her face, her name, her narrative without consent. Again, only this time, the world noticed. Back in Seattle, Simone finally made one phone call, not to the press, not to the airline, but to a small civil rights attorney named Maya Bishop. They met once, years ago, at a nonprofit benefit, shared a 2-minute conversation about power and invisibility. That was all Simone needed. She said 3 words into the phone. They used me, Maya responded. Let's remind them who's really in control. By Friday morning, a cease and desist letter had already been delivered to the airline's legal department. 2 pages, no fanfare, no threats, just clarity. Remove the campaign, retract the materials, issue a public apology, and never use Simone Carter's image or words again, or face litigation. The letter ended with a line that read, "You misread her once. Don't do it twice." The cease and desist letter didn't scream, it didn't threaten, it didn't beg for respect. It simply arrived quiet, direct, and laced with the weight of someone who had already been disrespected twice and wasn't going to let it happen a third time. The letter was addressed to the airline's legal department, but within hours, it had been read by nearly every senior leader at the company, forwarded, slacked, whispered about behind half-closed doors. Because the words in that letter didn't just request an end to the unauthorized campaign featuring Simone Carter's image and likeness. They warned them, remove the content, retract the message, apologize publicly, or face legal consequences that would cost them more than dollars. There was no bluff, no unnecessary drama, only a sentence that read like a closing door. You misread her once. Don't do it twice. But the damage was already out. In cities across the country, terminals were still rotating the now infamous campaign on digital walls and banners. Simone's face mid-stride, hoodie on, eyes steady, was placed between taglines like, "Every seat tells a story and equity in every aisle." To the airline, it was an attempt at redemption. To the public, it was a slap in the face. And to Simone Carter, it was theft again. She didn't respond immediately. While public relations teams scrambled and analysts debated the company's plummeting approval ratings on morning shows, Simone sat in a quiet office above a bookstore in Seattle. No team, no stylists, no press agent hovering at the door. Just her, a mug of black tea, and a notebook filled with clip news articles, court precedents, and quiet thoughts. She'd spent most of her life controlling narratives behind the scenes, crafting strategy, managing institutional trust. Now the world wanted her front and center. The irony wasn't lost on her. Social media had exploded the moment Maya Bishop's legal team confirmed the campaign was unauthorized. Hashtag Simone did not consent trended within hours. But this time, it wasn't just the usual swirl of outrage. This time, people brought their receipts. A former employee of the airline posted a 13-part thread about routine culture issues inside the company's regional hubs. A black flight attendant shared how she'd been told by a supervisor to smile softer because she looked intimidating in uniform. Passengers uploaded videos from previous flights, moments of microaggressions, profiling, dismissiveness. It was no longer just about Simone. It was about everyone who had ever been told they were too loud, too quiet, too different, too unrecognizable to belong in a space they had earned. Inside the airline's headquarters, things went from bad to worse. The chief marketing officer resigned within 24 hours of the cease and desist. Two project managers were quietly removed from their roles. By Friday morning, a third resignation came, this time from the VP of External Relations, who had signed off on the original campaign brief. Each left behind a pile of unreturned calls, pending interviews, and internal emails marked urgent. But what they couldn't resign from was the truth. They had used a woman's image without her permission after publicly humiliating her, after being the very reason she became a story in the first place, and now that story had turned into something they couldn't contain. Simone still hadn't spoken to the press, still hadn't posted, still hadn't responded to requests from the same networks that had once ignored her voice. But one letter caught her attention, not an email, not a DM, a handwritten envelope, addressed in clean cursive, Alana Pierce, investigative journalist. The point Alana's note was short, 3 paragraphs, no flattery, just honesty. She wasn't asking for a soundbite. She wasn't chasing a scoop. She was asking Simone a simple question. Do you want to tell the story yourself before they do it again? Simone took a full day to consider it. She walked the city, ate lunch alone in a small black-owned cafe, sat by the water until dusk, and by the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, she'd made up her mind. Not because she wanted attention, not because she needed vindication, but because she knew that if she didn't speak now, they'd rewrite her silence once again, this time with her face. The interview was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. No studio, no makeup crew, just a window-lit room in a quiet Seattle apartment. 2 chairs, 1 mic, and the same hoodie she'd worn the day they pulled her off the flight. When Alana asked, "Why now?" Simone answered without blinking. "Because I didn't give them my story, and they tried to sell it anyway." The camera blinked red, a small dot in the corner of the lens, recording. Simone Carter sat quietly in her chair, hoodie sleeves pulled over her wrists. No makeup, no script, just a worn leather notebook on her lap, thumb resting against the edge like a page she was about to turn. Across from her sat Alana Pierce, award-winning journalist, calm, composed, but clearly aware that this moment was different, not just newsworthy, historic, because for weeks, the world had been speaking about Simone, speculating, guessing, projecting. But now, finally, she was about to speak for herself. Ilana leaned forward slightly. "No preamble," she said gently. "We'll just start with this. What do you want people to know that hasn't been said?" Simone didn't blink, didn't look at the camera. She looked straight at Alana. "I want people to stop calling it an accident." The room fell silent. They didn't mistake me for a security threat. Simone continued. They didn't forget to ask permission before using my face. They didn't miscalculate. They acted exactly how they were trained to act. And that's the part people keep skipping over. Alana gave a small nod. Letting her continue, we keep calling it profiling. And yes, it is. But it's also procedure. It's built into how decisions are made. Who gets a second glance? Who gets asked to step aside? Who has to prove their belonging? She paused. And the worst part, they didn't care until they lost money. Not when they pulled me from line. Not when they went through my bag. Not when they humiliated me in public. Another pause. It took $4 billion for them to say, maybe we should listen. The clip went live 3 hours later. Uncut. 13 minutes and 47 seconds of Simone Carter speaking softly, steadily and completely changing the conversation. She didn't cry, didn't rant, didn't beg for empathy. She broke it down like a contract, like a strategist, like someone who knew exactly how power works because she was power. Within hours, the interview had over 2 million views. By the next morning, it passed 10. Teachers played it in classrooms. Corporate leaders circulated it in internal equity meetings. Podcasts dissected every sentence. Memes didn't mock it was reverence now. A quote from her response trended for days. Silence isn't the absence of a voice. It's the choice of when to use it. The airline, now cornered in every possible way, issued another statement. This one was longer, more serious, almost honest. They admitted the use of Simone's image was unauthorized, admitted that the incident in Denver had triggered an internal audit, promised policy changes, cultural reviews, new executive oversight, but the public wasn't moved. Because while they apologized now, they'd already made their choices, and those choices had faces, stories, screenshots, and consequences. On the streets of Chicago, someone spray-painted her quote across a brick wall in silver. They judged the hoodie, but the hoodie carried history. In Atlanta, a group of black high school students printed her interview transcript and read it aloud in assembly. In D.C., a nonprofit launched a new scholarship in her name for black girls pursuing careers in policy and equity reform. None of it was planned, none of it was asked for, but it all made sense. Because Simone hadn't just spoken, she had clarified. That same week, she received dozens of messages from high-level executives, most of them women, many of them black. They weren't just applauding her, they were thanking her for making space, for shifting something that had been broken for so long it felt normal. One message read, "Your silence changed the room. Your voice rebuilt it." Still, Simone didn't step into the spotlight. She didn't go on a speaking tour, didn't launch a podcast, didn't capitalize. Instead, she returned to her work, same private office, same routine, same hoodie, because she didn't need to become the story. She just needed to protect it. The final moment of the interview showed her packing up her notebook, sliding it into her tote. Alana asked one last question as the crew unplugged the mic. If you could go back to that day in the terminal, would you say anything different? Simone smiled softly. No. She said, I wouldn't change a thing. She stood up, adjusted the sleeves on her hoodie. They needed me to be loud, to justify their reaction. But I stayed still. She looked directly at Alana, and they weren't ready for that. Some stories burn fast. They trend. They flare. And then they vanish. But not this one. Not Simone Carter's. Because right when people thought the fire was dying down, someone poured gasoline on it. It started with a leak, Monday morning. An anonymous account posted a 45-second video clip on a small online forum. The title was simple. This is what really happened in Denver. No hashtags, no fanfare. Just a blurry timestamp, a static-filled audio feed, and the quiet, undeniable sound of truth. The video opened with a wide shot of Gate C12, busy, ordinary, until a woman in a gray hoodie stepped into frame. Simone. She stood calmly in the first-class line, boarding pass in hand. A gate agent, white, mid-30s, name badge unreadable, walked up to her. "You flying first today?" he asked. Tone sharp but friendly enough to pass for protocol. "Yes," Simone said, handing over her phone. There was a beat, a pause too long for comfort. Then the agent looked at someone off-screen and chuckled. "Look at this one," he said, probably using her husband's points. Someone else laughed in the background. Another voice chimed in, "Or the card she borrowed." The audio cracked, but the tone didn't. It was mocking, confident. A TSA officer entered the frame moments later. He didn't ask Simone any questions, just nodded at the agent and said, "We'll take it from here." The video ended with Simone being let out of frame. No raised voice, no resistance, just silence and judgment. By noon, the video had been reposted thousands of times. By 3 p.m., major outlets were quoting it in headlines. New footage reveal racial profiling at Denver airport. Simone Carter's silence was louder than we thought, and by dinner, the clip had been played on every major news network in the country. No edits, no commentary, because it didn't need any. The truth was plain and undeniable. Inside the airline, chaos reignited. The PR team had just begun to recover from the failed campaign backlash. Now they were back to emergency protocols, media flags, crisis emails, red folders marked urgent. The CEO canceled his trip to D.C. Board members demanded a closed-door session within 24 hours. And someone no one knew who muted every Slack channel company-wide. Because it was no longer about speculation, this was evidence. And it wasn't Simone who released it. At Maya Bishop's office, reporters lined up outside the glass door. They wanted comment, reaction, a response. Maya stood at the front window, arms crossed, unreadable. When an assistant asked if Simone planned to say anything, Maya replied without looking back. "She already did. Y'all just weren't ready to listen." Simone, meanwhile, was nowhere near a camera. She was sitting in a quiet botanical garden, notebook in her lap, pen uncapped. When the video surfaced, her phone vibrated 37 times in under 10 minutes. She didn't check a single message. She just sat, surrounded by green and silence, listening to the wind move through the leaves. Because when you've already told your truth, you don't need to repeat it every time someone else finally hears it. But inside the airline boardroom, the sound was anything but quiet. Leaders argued over next steps, issue another apology, fire the gate agent, blame the TSA one executive. Flustered and red-faced, slammed his palm on the table and said, "She didn't even say anything. This is getting out of hand." The room froze. That sentence was the problem. That sentence was the story. They still didn't get it because they thought power was volume, that leadership meant talking over people. That control came from explaining everything away. But Simone had proven otherwise. She had never raised her voice, never made a spectacle, and yet she'd shaken an entire industry to its core. The airline finally released another statement, longer this time, colder. "We are aware of newly released video footage and are conducting a thorough internal investigation in coordination with the appropriate airport and security authorities." It was bland, bureaucratic, empty, and the public knew it. One comment under their official post read, "You're not investigating, you're stalling." Another imagined being more shocked by the leak than the behavior it exposed. The damage was no longer containable, because now the story belonged to the people. That night, Simone returned home to find a handwritten note taped to her apartment door from her neighbor, an older black woman who'd lived in the building for over 30 years. It read, "They tried to strip you of your dignity, but you walked away with their blueprint. Keep going. We're with you." Simone held the note for a long time, then tucked it into her notebook, pressed it between the pages like a flower you never want to forget. The board met behind frosted glass that Tuesday morning. No coffee, no opening remarks, just tension. The leaked video had done more than confirm Simone Carter's story. It had pierced the illusion they'd worked so hard to protect that they were in control of the narrative, of the damage, of her. And now they weren't leading the conversation. They were chasing it. At the head of the table sat CEO Brent Caulfield. His tie was loosened, eyes sunken, fingers gripping the edge of a legal folder like it could stop the bleeding. Damage has gone viral, he muttered, almost to himself. We've issued 3 statements in 10 days. We've pulled the campaign. What else do they want across the table? Board member Karen Voss, head of risk and compliance, adjusted her glasses and answered without blinking. They want accountability. He scoffed. We apologized. She leaned forward. No, we rationalized. We deflected. We tried to spin silence into partnership. And we did it with the full knowledge that we never asked for permission. Another director cut in. The agent in the video has, he said anything, that's when the room fell still. Because he had, just not to them. While the executives prepared for legal fallout, the man who'd stood at the gate that day, Thomas Greeley, had been silent since the video surfaced. Until now, a letter appeared in the Denver Voice, a small regional paper known more for poetry and local politics than national scandal. The headline was modest, a letter of accountability from someone who was there inside it. Thomas Greeley wrote not like a man defending himself, but like someone carrying shame he could no longer bear. I don't know if I'll be believed, but I saw myself on that tape. I heard my voice, and I hated it. I said those words, the ones you heard, the ones you can't unhear. I've worked at that gate for 9 years, and that day, I didn't see a boarding pass. I didn't see credentials. I didn't see humanity. I saw a black woman in a hoodie and I made a joke, not because she deserved it, but because I thought no one would care, and I was wrong. The letter was raw, not a polished PR statement, not written by corporate counsel. It was honest, unfiltered, painful. He didn't try to save his job. He didn't blame Simone. He didn't ask for redemption. He confessed, and somehow that hit harder than anything the airline had done in weeks, because it wasn't orchestrated. It was human. The article went viral within hours. People shared screenshots. Underlining this one sentence again and again, I thought no one would care. That became the echo. Not just about Thomas, not just about Simone, but about the system. A system that doesn't change until someone bleeds. A system that trains you not to see, not to ask, not to wonder who someone really is until it costs you something. Simone read the letter while sitting on a bench near the water. The sky was overcast. Waves lapped at the stone wall below. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just reread one line 3 times. I didn't see humanity. And then she wrote something new in her notebook. It's not the words that expose you. It's how easily they leave your mouth. Meanwhile, at corporate headquarters, the fallout accelerated. A scheduled press conference was canceled. The CEO's assistant resigned. An anonymous whistleblower email was sent to the press, alleging the airline had a pattern of bearing incidents involving customers of color. By evening, the airline's general counsel had retained outside crisis counsel, another sign they knew things were slipping. Because at this point, it wasn't just about Simone. It was about everybody else they'd treated the same way who didn't have a camera, a platform, or a billion-dollar signature behind their silence. Later that night, Simone received an email. No subject line, no signature, just a single line of text, I see you now. And I'm sorry it took this long. She didn't trace it, didn't reply, but she copied the words into the last page of her notebook, folded the paper in half, tucked it into the back cover, not because she forgave, but because sometimes The smallest truths deserve a place even in a story built from silence. The line had been crossed. Not just by a single gate agent, not just by a tone-deaf ad campaign, not even by the airline's silence. It had been crossed by a culture, one that thought reputation could be managed, even while dignity was discarded. And now, the country was watching. 3 days after the leaked video of Simone Carter's boarding denial shook the nation, a congressional subcommittee issued a formal inquiry into systemic bias in commercial air travel. It wasn't performative, it wasn't symbolic, it was procedural, real, and, for once timely, C-SPAN lit up with press conferences. Senators, many of whom hadn't said a word in years about racial profiling, were now scrambling to pronounce Simone Carter correctly. One committee chair stood at a podium, papers in hand, and asked the question bluntly: how many passengers were pulled aside, not because of a threat, but because someone didn't like the way they looked? Reporters scribbled, flashes popped, and somewhere in the background, the airline's general counsel whispered into a burner phone. Meanwhile, Simone remained silent, not because she didn't know what to say, but because everyone else was finally saying what they should have said from the beginning. She didn't need to speak to be felt. She didn't need to stand behind a podium to shift the room. But still, an invitation arrived, hand-delivered, sealed in cream-colored cardstock, signed with the embossed seal of the United States Senate. Simone Carter, we invite you to participate in a special hearing on equity, access, and accountability in commercial travel. Your presence would offer the committee valuable insight as we explore necessary policy change. There was no threat, no request for her to relive anything, just a door opened, politely. Finally, Maya Bishop paced the room when Simone read the letter. She'd seen this play before. They'll smile, they'll thank you, then they'll spin it. But Simone didn't seem shaken. She tapped her pen against the armrest. Thoughtful. I'm not going there for them, she said. I'd go for the girl watching from the back of the classroom, the one who's already learned to keep her hoodie up and her head down. She paused. I want her to know silence can be armor, but it can also be a sword. The next day, Simone issued her own short statement, just 3 sentences. I have received the committee's invitation. I will attend. I will not perform. No smiley photos, no sound bites, just boundaries and purpose. Back at the airline, the walls continued to close in. Internal employee groups began organizing. Former Black staff, once paid off quietly through HR settlements, were now requesting to speak at the federal level. A group of airline union members released an open letter of solidarity with Simone. Shareholder meetings turned heated. Investors began openly questioning not just leadership, but culture, values, future viability. One blunt email leaked from a major stakeholder read, "If we can't fly passengers with basic dignity, why should anyone fly with us at all?" Simone's day before the committee was set for Monday morning, but she refused to fly. Instead, she traveled by train, quiet car, window seat, notebook in hand. She didn't need the irony of stepping onto one of their planes, not after what happened, not after what she built from it. The hearing room was modest. Wood panel walls, rows of cameras in the back, lawyers shifting in their suits, politicians checking their tie knots, and then Simone entered. No entourage, no flash. Same hoodie, same tote bag, same quiet presence that had already undone a multi-billion-dollar machine. She took her seat, unfolded her hands, and waited. When the chair recognized her, Simone didn't clear her throat, didn't tap the mic. She just leaned in and said, "Thank you for seeing me, because others did not." She paused. "Let it land. I'm not here to recount pain for performance. I'm here to recommend policy, because the systems you've built don't need more apologies. They need consequences." Her statement was just under 8 minutes. Calm, direct, no theatrics. She spoke of human dignity, of who gets questioned and who gets waved through, of how silence can be both survival and resistance. And then she finished with one final line. I didn't pull your merger. I just held a mirror, and you saw yourselves. There was no applause. This wasn't a TED Talk. It wasn't meant to be, but still cameras stayed locked on her, not because she demanded it, but because you don't look away from truth once you finally recognize it. Simone Carter didn't just emerge from silence. She was raised by it. Not the kind that hides, not the kind that cowers, but the kind that listens, the kind that calculates before it strikes, the kind passed down by men who don't speak unless the room absolutely needs them to. Her father, Henry Carter, was never a loud man. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. People listened because he made silence feel heavier than any speech, because when he did speak, he meant every word. To the neighborhood. Henry was a retired Army logistics officer, kept to himself, owned a worn-down pickup and a toolbox that never gathered dust. But to Simone, he was the compass. The one who taught her that dignity had a posture and that black stillness wasn't weakness, it was power in its rawest form. After Simone testified before the Senate subcommittee, she took the train back home not to Seattle but to Eastwood, Georgia, a town too small for Uber, big enough for gossip, and quiet enough to hear your own thoughts for the first time in weeks. She hadn't been home in years, not since her mother passed, but she knew her father would be waiting, not on the porch, not in the yard. He'd be in the kitchen, same chair, same mug, reading the same physical newspaper. Like the internet never quite convinced him it was worth trusting. He didn't say, welcome back. Didn't say, I'm proud. He just poured her a second cup of coffee, set it across from him, and nodded once. That was enough. They sat in silence for several minutes. The clock ticked loud. The fridge hummed. Then, finally, Henry spoke. You handled that better than most men in uniform would have. Simone looked up. It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd ever given. She didn't smile, just nodded back. He continued, let them try to rewrite your truth, but don't ever let them borrow your silence again. She knew what he meant, because Henry Carter had once been more than just Army. He'd worked for a federal logistics intelligence program, a shadow branch that didn't appear on Google searches. He was trained to see movement before it became motion, taught to recognize disruption before it erupted, and he had always warned her of one thing. They don't fear noise. They fear calculation. That night, she and her father walked the length of their old neighborhood, past cracked sidewalks and rusted mailboxes, through streets lined with pecan trees and porch lights. Kids waved. Elders nodded. Some didn't recognize her. Some whispered after she passed. Simone didn't care. This wasn't about being seen. This was about remembering where her silence came from, about grounding her voice in the soil that raised it. Later, Henry took her down to the garage, same place he taught her how to fix a carburetor at age 12. Same corner he kept an old safe behind paint cans and a tarp. He didn't say much, just opened it. Inside were three things. One, a folded American flag from his final military send-off. Two, a stack of redacted files with faded agency stamps. Three, a thick leather-bound journal, worn at the corners. He handed her the journal. This ain't strategy. He said, it's history. Simone opened the first page. There, written in clean, blocky handwriting, they call it quiet when we don't protest. But really, we're just recording everything. She flipped through it. Pages of notes, reflections on conflict, command, compliance, records of conversations he'd never had out loud. It was a manifesto of stillness, of boundaries, of what it meant to navigate power when you weren't expected to have any. Henry looked her in the eye. They think power starts when we speak, but we know better. It starts the moment we decide not to explain ourselves. That night, Simone sat on the hood of the old pickup, hoodie on, journal in her lap, looking up at stars not dimmed by city lights for once. And she wrote, not for headlines, not for reposts, but for herself. They wanted a statement. But I was built from testimony. And the difference is, I didn't come to perform. I came to document. The next morning, Simone stood in her childhood backyard, barefoot on the dewy grass, a coffee mug cradled in her palms. Eastwood, Georgia hadn't changed. Same patchy fences, same rust on the swing set, same church bell tolling like it did every 7 a.m. But she had become the storm they didn't see coming, and now the winds she stirred were circling back to the center. Across the country, in a sleek Manhattan boardroom wrapped in glass and ego, change was happening, but not the kind they'd wanted. The airline's interim board had convened again. 3 resignations, 2 pending lawsuits, and a congressional inquiry later. They were no longer trying to repair a brand. They were trying to survive it. And someone in that room finally said what no one had dared until now. We need her, not as a press token, not as a diversity hire, not even to win the public back, but because they had run out of people who actually understood what leadership meant, and Simone Carter had just given the entire nation a masterclass. That afternoon, an email landed in Simone's inbox. Subject: strategic consultation. Leadership restructuring opportunity from interim chair. Allied Sky Airways. It was brief, formal, too polite to sound genuine, but just desperate enough to feel real. We respectfully invite Ms. Simone Carter to join a newly formed Equity Oversight Committee as an advisor, with full operational insight and authority. Simone didn't answer. Not that day, not the next either. Instead, she drove to the edge of town, to the house of Ms. Lottie May, a retired school teacher who'd once taught Simone to read between the lines. Lottie answered the door in a faded house dress and bright pink slippers. "I saw you on that hearing." She said, "No hello needed. You sat like you'd already won." Simone smiled. "I hadn't. I just knew I wasn't afraid to lose." They sat in silence for a while. Then Lottie asked the question everyone else was thinking. "You gonna take that offer?" Simone looked out toward the road, long and cracked and endless. "If I walk in that room, I can help change how it works," she said slowly. "But if I stay outside, I might force them to burn it down and start over." Lottie sipped her tea, then said something soft, almost a whisper. "Sometimes, baby, the only way to end the fire is to become the architect of the rebuild." That night, Simone called Maya. They didn't talk like lawyer and client. They talked like sisters in a world that always made you choose between safety and truth. "I need a clause," Simone said. Maya laughed. "You always need a clause?" "No, this one's different." Simone replied, "If I go in, I want it written in stone. No marketing, no press photos, no branding my name without consent. If I'm part of this, it's on my terms every step." Maya didn't hesitate. "I'll write it tonight." Because that was the difference now. Simone wasn't stepping in as the help. She was entering as a condition. On the 3rd day, Simone responded to the airline. Her email was 6 lines long. "I will participate in the oversight process under the following conditions." Attached was a red-lined agreement. It restructured their entire committee proposal. It added new language, created protections, shifted power. By the time they finished reading it, they realized they hadn't hired a consultant. They just invited a governor into their house. News broke that Friday. Simone Carter accepts oversight role with major airline on her own terms. The article was short, no interviews, no quotes from Simone, just a statement. Change doesn't begin with an apology. It begins with access, accountability, and authority. Some praised her, some questioned her, some said she should have walked away and watched them crumble. But Simone didn't do this for revenge. She did it for clarity, for every young girl with a hoodie and a head full of ideas, for every man like her father who taught her to walk quiet but aim sharp. She wasn't there to clean their mess. She was there to make sure they never created one like it again. That night, Simone stood in front of her old high school gymnasium. They'd invited her to speak. She declined. Instead, she dropped off a box. Inside, one leather-bound notebook, one copy of her Senate testimony, and a handwritten note. Let them read this before they ask who belongs in the room. The first day was quiet. Simone didn't show up with cameras. No security detail. No smiling executives waiting at the door. She walked into Allied Sky headquarters like she was heading to a library, wearing the hoodie, carrying the tote, no jewelry, no fanfare, just presence. And the moment she stepped into the glass elevator, every conversation in the lobby died mid-sentence, because now she wasn't just a story, she was structure. They gave her a corner office. She moved to a smaller one. They offered her an executive assistant. She declined. They tried to introduce her during a town hall. She refused to be introduced. I'm not new, she said flatly. You just weren't paying attention before. In the first meeting of the newly formed Equity Oversight Committee, Simone did something no one expected. She let the silence stretch. 30 seconds, then a minute, then longer. People shifted, coughed, checked their watches. Then she finally spoke. Who in this room has ever been pulled out of line not for breaking a rule, but for breaking a stereotype? 3 hands went up, all black, all junior staff. Not a single executive moved. Simone nodded. That's why we're here. The committee wasn't for show, not under her. In her first week, she reviewed 34 internal memos, 17 flagged incident reports, and 6 employee complaints that had been marked resolved without contact from HR. She reopened every single one, not out of vengeance, but out of pattern recognition. She wasn't just tracking behavior, she was mapping power, and everywhere she looked, she found evidence of quiet erosion of voices trimmed down before they grew loud enough to matter. Meanwhile, outside those walls, something else was growing. It started with a blog post from a student at Howard University. She didn't flip a table, she built a seat, and then she said, I'll sit here, but only if the rest of us can too. That post got shared 100 and I'll times in 2 days. Then came the hoodie movement. Students, teachers, transit workers, they all started showing up in gray hoodies, posting photos, captioning them with her words, I didn't come to perform. I came to document. A mural appeared in Detroit, then Oakland, then Harlem. Always the same image, Simone walking forward, not looking back. She never acknowledged it, not publicly, but one night, as she locked up her office late, she paused by the window. Across the street, taped to a lamppost, was a printed-out photo of her Senate testimony. Underneath, handwritten in marker, she changed the altitude without raising her voice. Simone stared at it for a moment, then turned off the lights. By month's end, the airline's board had approved her first reform proposal, mandatory bias response training not just for staff, for executives, quarterly equity audits, anonymous reporting channels with third-party reviewers, and the one clause she insisted be non-negotiable. No branding of internal change using employee likeness without direct, documented consent. It passed, unanimously. Her influence was undeniable, but her power didn't come from the badge they gave her. It came from the fact that she never needed it. She wasn't waiting to be invited. She was building the table while they were still asking who drew the blueprints. Then came the call, not from a news station, not from a senator, from a teacher, 5th grade, South Atlanta. Her class had watched the hearing, read the articles, printed the mural, and now they were asking, could Ms. Carter come speak to them? Simone paused. She had turned down every invitation like this for weeks. Panels, podcasts, keynotes. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted the policy. But this felt different. She showed up that Friday. No cameras, no press. Just her in a room of 10-year-olds, wide eyes, raised hands. One girl asked the question that stopped Simone mid-breath. Were you scared when they made you feel small? Simone knelt beside her. I wasn't scared of them, she said softly. I was scared of forgetting who I was just to make them comfortable. The girl nodded, wrote it down, didn't even look up again, just kept writing. That was enough. On the way out, the teacher handed Simone a thank you card. Inside, all the kids had written one word. Words like stillness, brave, smart, loud without yelling, hoodie, leader. Simone folded the card carefully, placed it in her tote, and whispered, now that's equity. By the end of spring, the airline's executives had grown quiet, not reflective, not remorseful, just quiet, like people who knew they were being watched from every angle and still didn't understand how they got here. They hadn't just lost a merger, they'd lost public trust, investor confidence, and most humiliating of all, control of the story, because for months now, they weren't the ones telling it. And for the first time in their careers, no amount of brand polish could fix what was broken. The consequences didn't land all at once. They arrived in slow, deliberate waves, and each one hit harder than the last. The first was legal. 3 former employees who had filed discrimination complaints over the past 5 years, cases previously marked, settled or dismissed, filed new suits, backed by new lawyers, empowered by new eyes. And this time, the public was paying attention. One of them, a former gate agent named Marcus Banks, had been fired after reporting a colleague for repeatedly questioning black passengers with valid first-class tickets. He stood in front of a courthouse wearing a simple suit and said to the press, "They silenced me because I didn't look like someone who fit in upstairs." Now the silence is theirs. The second wave came from within. A group of shareholders filed a class action lawsuit claiming the airline had knowingly jeopardized brand integrity through a sustained pattern of cultural negligence. Their brief included the Simone Carter incident, the unauthorized ad campaign, the leak, the congressional hearing, all of it. And at the heart of the suit was this sentence: the company failed to treat people like people and then tried to monetize that failure. By June, the airline stock had dropped 22%. 2 hedge funds pulled their equity entirely. A Fortune 100 partner suspended a co-branded loyalty deal, and still Simone hadn't said a word about any of it, because this was never about vengeance. It was about exposure. And exposure doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits. Inside the company, the leadership structure had begun to rot. Brent Caulfield, the once unshakable CEO, was suddenly on sabbatical. An internal memo announced a restructuring of executive priorities, but everyone knew what it meant. He was done. The same man who once called Simone a powerful brand moment behind closed doors had now become a footnote in a story he never saw coming. Meanwhile, the Equity Oversight Committee Simone chaired wasn't just surviving, it was expanding. With her reforms in place, anonymous reporting surged. Employees who had once been scared to speak were finally stepping forward. Patterns emerged. Voices sharpened. A map of injustice began to take shape. And for every case that surfaced, Simone treated it the same way. Listen, investigate, act. No press, no drama, just correction. Because justice isn't a moment, it's a practice. But not everyone was happy about it. Whispers started to rise that she was too strict, too clinical, too quiet. She doesn't even smile, one mid-level exec muttered during a closed meeting. Simone heard about the comment later. She didn't get angry. She simply wrote a note on a sticky pad, posted it to her desk wall, and underlined the words, "We don't need another friendly face. We need a firewall." Then came the tipping point. A second leaked video, this time, not from the airport, but from an internal training session held months before Simone ever joined. In it, a senior director could be heard joking during a mock boarding simulation. Let's say we got another hoodie situation. We'll just say it's a TSA issue and call it a day. The room laughed. Someone even added, make sure PR's on standby. The video ended with the phrase, no one cares unless they're famous. This time, the public exploded. Simone wasn't a footnote anymore. She was a mirror. And now, the reflection was undeniable. A protest formed outside Allied Sky's headquarters the next morning. It wasn't massive. No national organizations, no big banners, just quiet rows of people, hoodies pulled over their heads, standing shoulder to shoulder, holding signs that read, we're all Simone. Stillness is not silence. No more delays. Simone watched from the 14th floor, didn't call security, didn't issue a statement. She just stood there, notebook in hand, and wrote, let them stay as long as they need. This time, nobody's getting pulled out of line. The crowd outside didn't grow louder, it grew wider. By Thursday, what started as a quiet group of hoodie-clad protesters had stretched down 2 city blocks. Local shopkeepers brought out folding chairs. A food truck showed up and started giving out sandwiches. A choir from a nearby college sang spirituals near the curb. There were no chants, no megaphones, just a slow, building sense of presence like a tide that wasn't going anywhere. They weren't asking for Simone. They were standing with her inside the glass walls of Allied Sky's corporate headquarters. The mood was somewhere between panic and paralysis. The second leaked video had done more than embarrass them. It confirmed what critics had been saying for months. This wasn't a mistake. It was a method. The board called an emergency meeting. Again, for the first 30 minutes, no one spoke Simone's name. They said the incident, the oversight, the public optics. Then a younger director, mid-30s, black, newly appointed under Simone's oversight plan, spoke plainly, you're still trying to control the weather when the storm is already inside the building. Later that day, they asked Simone if she'd be willing to issue a joint statement to calm things, to ease the pressure. They offered her final approval on the wording, a video apology from the executive team, a promise to reinvest in community outreach. She declined, not angrily, not dramatically, just firmly. I didn't build this movement. She said, I just refused to walk away from it. At 4:22 p.m., a public letter appeared online, posted anonymously at first, but clearly crafted with legal clarity and emotional precision. It read, we, the employees, no longer believe silence is safety. We have watched for years as colleagues were quietly exited, as passengers were quietly profiled, as leadership quietly excused itself from accountability. And now we say no more. Simone Carter did not break this company. She revealed it. And now we demand that what was exposed be rebuilt. By midnight, 483 employees had signed it. Pilots, flight attendants, IT staff, marketing assistants, janitors. Simone didn't ask them to. She didn't even know the letter existed until Maya forwarded it with a one-line message. This was never about a seat. It was about the floor we all stand on. But not everyone was celebrating. In the days that followed, certain factions of the public began to push back. Op-eds surfaced accusing Simone of militant professionalism. Some commentators asked if her standards were too extreme. Others said she was turning an airline into a courtroom. One panelist on a financial talk show said, great leaders unite. She divides. But the comment that circulated the most was from a national anchor. She never even raised her voice. But somehow, the whole system bent around her, meant as a critique, read as a compliment. Back in her office, Simone watched it all unfold. The praise, the protest, the pushback. She stayed calm, focused, unshaken, because she wasn't here to be liked. She was here to be useful, and her usefulness had never been clearer. The next morning, She received a formal invitation from the Department of Transportation. They were forming a national advisory board on bias and access in commercial travel, and they wanted her to serve as senior chair. It was the kind of appointment that came with press, security, power, visibility. Simone stared at the letter for a long moment, then folded it quietly. Later that evening, she met Maya in a quiet cafe. "You gonna take it?" Maya asked, half smiling. Simone stirred her tea. "I didn't come this far to become what I dismantled." "Then what'll help?" she said. But from the outside, Maya nodded. Of course she would, because Simone wasn't looking for a platform. She was building leverage. On her walk home, Simone passed by the protest line. It was late. Most had gone home, but a few still stood hoodies up, candles in hand, signs resting against their legs. One young woman held out a folded piece of paper, didn't say a word. Simone took it, unfolded it when she reached her apartment. Inside a poem. They told her to sit down. She made the ground rise. They told her to speak up. She waited, and when she spoke, the whole sky shifted. She placed it on her nightstand. Next to the red folder from Denver, next to her father's journal, next to the handwritten note from the kids at that South Atlanta school. She didn't need trophies. She had evidence. Friday morning, a calendar alert. Just one name, Brent Caulfield. He had requested the meeting through back channels. No assistance, no PR team, just him, face to face. Simone didn't ask why. She already knew. This wasn't about fixing anything. It was about legacy. He wanted to rewrite his ending, and he knew she was the editor now. The conference room was neutral, cold, too quiet, glass walls, filtered sunlight, no press, no audience. Simone arrived first. She always did. She sat at the far end of the table. Hoodie pulled over her head, red legal pad in front of her, pen uncapped but untouched. When Brent entered, he looked smaller than she remembered, less like the CEO who once greenlit an unauthorized ad campaign, and more like a man who realized the building wasn't his anymore. He didn't offer his hand. "Smart. Thank you for making time." He began. Simone said nothing. Brent sat down, adjusted his cuffs, and cleared his throat like the silence offended him. "I wanted to speak off the record." She raised an eyebrow. "There is no such thing anymore." He paused, looked down, then back up. "I made a mistake," he said. Simone tilted her head slightly. "Which one?" He didn't answer right away. "The campaign. The way we responded to the incident. The leadership failures." He hesitated. "You..." Simone finally picked up her pen and wrote one word, "You." Underlined it twice, then looked at him and said, "Why now?" Brent leaned forward. "Because I lost everything." Simone shook her head slowly. "No. You spent everything, and you only noticed the cost when the check came with my name on it." He tried to soften, tried to explain his upbringing, his mentors, how he didn't mean harm, just misread the moment. Simone listened, not because she cared, but because she'd learned how much power existed in silence. He kept talking about headlines, about pressure, about investors. Then, in the most honest moment of the meeting, he said, "I didn't know how to handle someone like you." There it was, not someone with your qualifications, not someone with your insight. Someone like you. Simone closed her pad. "You didn't know how to handle someone who didn't need your permission to matter." He looked away. "You thought power lived in your hands because no one had ever told you otherwise. You thought silence was submission, that being calm meant being compliant." She stood up. "But I wasn't quiet because I lacked words. Brent, I was quiet because I didn't owe you any..." He didn't stand, didn't argue, didn't apologize, because by now, he understood he wasn't the main character in this room. Not anymore. As Simone walked toward the door, he asked, "What happens to me now?" She turned, looked at him one last time. "That depends," she said, "on whether you still think redemption is yours to narrate." Outside the building, the protest line had thinned. It was early, still gray outside, but a small group stood at the corner, holding thermoses and quiet signs. One read, "Let her finish the story." Simone nodded once, kept walking. That afternoon, she issued her final report as head of the Equity Oversight Committee, 29 pages, 4 policy overhauls, 3 terminations, 1 recommendation for outside audit. Her closing paragraph was only 2 sentences. Silence was never the absence of justice. It was the waiting room where justice put on its shoes. The media called it the most disciplined corporate reckoning of the decade. Shareholders called it essential loss. Employees called it long overdue. But Simone didn't call it anything because she didn't need credit. She needed closure. That evening, she boarded a train heading west. No press knew. No one followed. She sat by the window, hoodie up, notebook in her lap. Across from her sat a little black girl, maybe 8 or 9. She stared at Simone for a long time, then whispered, "My mama said you made the rules different now." Simone smiled. "No," she said, "I just reminded them the rules weren't made for us, so we had to write our own." As the train pulled out of the city, Simone looked back only once, not to mourn, not to question, just to acknowledge. She had come into a system that never expected her to belong and walked out having changed its course forever, not with rage, not with revenge, but with a silence sharp enough to split history in two. The headlines faded. The lawsuits moved into courtrooms. The airline quietly rebranded, changed logos, shuffled leaders, new ads, new tone, same planes, same sky, but the silence Simone Carter left behind, it didn't fade, it stayed. And in that silence, people started hearing themselves more clearly than ever before. Simone didn't grant interviews, didn't write a book, didn't launch a foundation. What she did instead was disappear just far enough to let the world look at itself without her name in the sentence, because that was the point. She had never needed to be the symbol. She had just held up the mirror, and now that mirror was everywhere. 3 weeks after her final report, a group of students in Newark High School hosted a town hall on institutional bias. They used the leaked gate footage and Simone's Senate testimony as curriculum. One student said she didn't break the rules. She revealed who they were made for. It wasn't just a lesson in social studies. It was personal. It was lived. And for those kids, some wearing hoodies, some not, Simone's silence felt familiar. Not powerless, not fearful, just strategic. At a mid-sized tech company in Austin, a black project manager quietly submitted a proposal for internal policy reform, title Carter Clause. It included 3 pages of steps for how to escalate complaints without retaliation, how to protect whistleblowers, and how to ensure representation without performance. The founder approved it, no questions asked, because now, saying no to someone like Simone, even when she wasn't in the room, felt expensive. Meanwhile, a small bookstore in Richmond began stocking a plain, gray-covered journal titled Quiet Power Field Notes on Holding Space Author, Unknown, Publisher Independent, but every page inside included lines pulled from Simone's notes, not verbatim quotes, just echoes, reflections, routines, reminders, printed on soft recycled paper. It sold out in 4 days. In every city, something was shifting, not big, not loud, but steady. Managers were reading body language more closely. HR teams were re-examining their definitions of professional. Marketing departments were rethinking the difference between diversity and visibility. And in classrooms, in coffee shops, in staff lounges, a name kept coming up, not as a celebrity, but as a case study. Simone Carter, the woman in the hoodie, the one who never yelled, the one who never asked to be lifted, just refused to be stepped on. In a podcast episode that aired that month, a civil rights attorney summed it up perfectly. Simone didn't ask for justice to be convenient. She asked for it to be consistent, and we weren't ready. Back in Seattle, Simone sat in her apartment surrounded by plants, soft light, and notebooks stacked like bricks. She kept a routine: morning walks, 2 black coffees a day, 1 visit per week to her father's grave. She didn't disappear. She just made herself unavailable to the noise. And in that quiet, she began answering the letters. Hundreds had arrived, some from students, some from mothers, some from men who had never written a letter in their lives, but needed to tell her, in their own awkward handwriting, that she'd made them feel seen. She answered 5 a day, handwritten, mailed with care, not because she had to, but because that was the work. One letter stood out. It was from a boy named Terrence, 12 years old, Chicago. He wrote, "I used to be scared to sit in the front row. People say I act like I'm trying too hard, but now I do it anyway, because you didn't ask for permission." And they still had to listen. At the bottom, in all caps, he added, "I'm wearing my hoodie tomorrow." Simone placed the letter on her nightstand. No frame, no highlight, just there, present, because that boy didn't need her autograph. He needed to know someone had seen him first. And that, right there, was the lesson. It was never about going viral, never about courtrooms or cameras. It was about teaching a system through stillness, through stamina, through unshakable self-worth, what it means to confront a wall and say, "You built this to stop me. Now I'm going to use it as a foundation." Simone Carter didn't expect to hear from him again. His name was Marcus Fallon, former VP of External Affairs at Allied Sky. The same man who sat through every executive meeting about her, never spoke up, never stood in her way either, just stayed silent, well-dressed, comfortable, the quiet kind of complicity. But 3 months after her final report, Simone opened her inbox to find an email with one subject line: "I was wrong. May I speak?" She almost deleted it. Almost. But something about the phrasing, how it didn't ask for forgiveness, just permission, made her pause. She replied with a single line: "Only if we meet on my terms." 2 days later, they sat across from each other at a modest table in a community center in South Seattle. No skyline views, no marble floors, no catered lunch trays, just folding chairs, filtered sunlight, and the kind of quiet you earn by showing up where no one's looking. Simone wore her hoodie. Marcus wore his regret. He opened with the truth: "I watched it happen. Simone, I watched them profile you, dismiss you, and eventually try to claim you. And I didn't say a word." She waited. No rush, no expression. He continued, "I told myself I was protecting my job, told myself I could do more from the inside. But the truth is, I wasn't brave. I was convenient." Simone finally spoke. "You weren't silent. You were insulated." Marcus flinched, but nodded. "You're right." They sat for a long moment. Simone leaned forward. "Why now?" Marcus exhaled. "Because you didn't just change the company. You changed me, and I need to be useful." He slid a folder across the table. Inside, a proposal, not from the airline, from Marcus himself. He'd started working with a group of community organizers, many of them formerly incarcerated, many of them black and brown, who had long been denied stable air travel for work, family visits, even court-mandated travel. The barriers subtle: no IDs, no access to credit cards, overbooked budget fares that always seemed to bump the same kind of people. Marcus wanted to create a traveler justice initiative: education, advocacy, legal support. He didn't ask Simone to lead it. He asked her to bless it. She read the entire proposal in silence, closed the folder, then said, "It's incomplete." He looked startled. "What's missing?" She tapped the front page. "Accountability. You're centering the solution, but not the harm. You're trying to build forward without admitting who got trampled." Marcus swallowed hard. I can fix that. Simone looked him in the eye. No, you can own it. Later that week, Marcus went public. He released a personal statement, one that shocked the corporate world. I was part of the culture that let silence grow into strategy. I did not speak when I should have, and now I will not lead until I have earned the right to follow. He stepped down from every board he sat on, donated 6 months of severance to a passenger rights legal defense fund, and joined the initiative not as a founder, but as a volunteer. Simone never asked for any of it, but she watched. Because real change wasn't just a viral moment, it was a quiet, stubborn refusal to remain the same. In the weeks that followed, the movement spread again. Not headlines, not lawsuits, just people showing up to tell the truth. A group of flight attendants created an internal storytelling circle where staff could anonymously share experiences of bias from passengers and supervisors. A regional airport started a pilot program offering on-site travel education for communities without access to credit. And in a small office in Atlanta, 3 organizers drafted what they called the Passenger Bill of Human Dignity. No legal power, but every word rang like justice waiting to happen. Simone read it, marked it up, added one line at the top: "You can't fix what you refuse to name." One evening, she returned to the Seattle Community Center alone, the same folding table, same window light. She brought her notebook, sat for an hour, wrote quietly. When the staff came to lock up, they noticed she'd left something behind a manila envelope. Inside typed notes, printed materials, a hand-scrawled page labeled Framework for Ethical Flight. At the bottom, her signature. She didn't need credit, she needed continuity, because the story wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who refused to be silent ever again. The invitation arrived folded neatly in a navy envelope. No title, no logos, just a handwritten note at the top. "We'd like you to see what we're learning." It came from a team at Allied Sky's Denver terminal, the very gate where it all began. A new training unit had been formed, staffed entirely by volunteers from across departments: pilots, crew, front desk agents, baggage handlers, even a few supervisors. They were calling it the regrounding program. No cameras, no corporate slogans, just the quiet question: what does dignity actually look like in motion? Simone didn't say yes right away. She didn't owe them that, but something in her wanted to see, not to validate, not to forgive, but to witness. Because sometimes the truest test of change is whether the system can function when the spotlight fades. She arrived without announcement, wore black sneakers, gray slacks, and of course, the hoodie, the same one. The room was plain folding chairs, scuffed floors, a whiteboard with the words "Unlearning is the first flight." About 20 people were there. Some recognized her instantly, others didn't. It didn't matter. She sat in the back. No clipboard, no mic, just a notepad and a quiet gaze. The session opened with an exercise. Write down. The facilitator said, "The first time you were told who didn't belong, not what you thought, not what you feared, but what you were taught." One by one, they wrote, some slowly, some with shaking hands. Then they shared. A gate agent remembered being told as a trainee, "Trust your instincts," especially with single black men in full backpacks. A flight attendant recalled a senior telling her, "Smile softer" when boarding groups from Atlanta. One young staffer said nothing, just held up their card. It read, "Me." Simone exhaled, not in judgment, in recognition. This was not performance. This was what beginning again looked like. Later, they broke into small groups. The question on the wall: what have you done in silence? The answers didn't come easy. One man said he'd seen a colleague escort a passenger off a plane because she looked high, even though she was simply tired and quiet. He hadn't said anything. Another admitted he used to keep a second set of rules for problem passengers, a mental list that somehow only ever included people of color, non-English speakers, or women who didn't smile back. He said he didn't realize it until her stillness made him look at what filled the silence in his own mind. Simone sat and listened, took notes, no speeches, but when one staffer turned to her and asked, "How did you stay calm that day?" she answered, "For the first time, with no script, I wasn't calm." She said, "I was focused. I had already seen the pattern. I just needed to show the world the print." Another staffer asked, "Do you think we can undo it?" Simone looked up. "You can't undo what was done, but you can decide what happens next. And if enough people do that at the same time, we call that progress." As the session ended, one older agent stood up, graying hair, soft eyes. She walked to the front and held up a printed ticket. It was Simone's. From that flight, the one they never let her take, someone found this in the system. She said, "I wanted you to have it." She handed it over, both hands, like passing a flag. Simone took it, held it for a long moment, then folded it gently and placed it in her notebook. Not as a memory, but as proof that the story had always been real. As she left, someone stopped her in the hallway. Young, nervous, maybe new. "I'm learning." They said, "I'm sorry it took this long." Simone offered a small nod. No smile, just clarity. Just don't let it take this long for someone else. That night, back in her apartment, Simone opened her notebook, flipped to the final page, and wrote, "I walked into their system so no one else would have to walk in alone." She paused, then underlined the word walked, because that's what it had always been about. Not running, not fighting, not shouting, just walking forward, unshaken, uninvited, but undeniable. There were no cameras this time, no reporters lurking behind terminal pillars, no social media gotcha moments, no one holding out a mic, asking her how it felt to come full circle. Simone Carter didn't need ceremony. She had her silence. She had her steps. And most importantly, she had her hoodie. Gate C12. Denver International Airport. It looked the same, but this time, she wasn't boarding. She wasn't being questioned. She wasn't being watched. She came to watch. It was early, 6:15 a.m. Early. The kind of early where the lights still hum and the floors still smell like bleach and jet fuel. Simone had always preferred that hour when everything felt unpolished, unperformed, real. She sat down 3 rows away from the gate. No entourage, no badge, just her notebook, her quiet eyes, and that calm, grounded posture that had become her signature. There was a new gate agent now, a young woman, probably mid-20s, bright blue eyes and braids. She looked sharp, focused, but kind, professional, but not performative. Simone watched as she greeted passengers. No fake smile, no scanning for suspicion, just presence. One passenger, black, maybe 19, approached the desk with his boarding pass. Hood up, eyes low, headphones in. The agent leaned forward slightly and said, "You're good. Sweetheart, Group 1 today." He looked up, surprised, nodded. "Thanks." It was a small moment, but for Simone, it was everything. She opened her notebook, page 213, blank. She wrote, "The system didn't collapse. It cracked just enough to let breath in." A woman sitting nearby recognized her, didn't say a word, just smiled, raised her coffee in a quiet toast. Simone returned the gesture. That was enough. She didn't want a speech. She wanted silence that respected silence. A little later, a man approached her, tall, bearded, wearing an Allied Sky ID badge. "Excuse me, Ms. Carter." She looked up. "I wanted to say something. I work in internal ops, not front line, but I followed everything. I saw it happen. And then I saw it shift. Simone stayed still. I don't expect anything. He added, I just want you to know my team changed because you didn't. That landed harder than he probably knew. Simone nodded. He stepped away. For 2 hours, she sat and observed. No big gestures, no policy reviews, just watching. The same gate that once humiliated her, now a space trying to relearn dignity. Was it perfect? No, but people weren't flinching the same way. Passengers weren't apologizing for existing. Employees weren't avoiding eye contact with each other. Simone closed her notebook and stood. She walked to the window, where planes glided in and out. Metal birds full of people. Unaware they were flying through something, a black woman in a hoodie helped to build without ever shouting. As she turned to leave, she passed a security officer standing post near the checkpoint, black, mid-50s. He looked at her, then looked again. I remember that day. He said, his voice low, I wasn't on duty, but I heard, and I watched what came next. He didn't ask for a selfie, didn't offer a handshake, just looked at her and said, sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the one that waits. She smiled, for real this time. Outside, the Colorado air was crisp, sky-wide, blue, clean. She walked along the sidewalk toward the terminal's edge. Across the street, a woman held a toddler in one hand and her suitcase in the other. The toddler pointed, Mommy, that's the lady in the story. The mother smiled. Yes, baby, that's her. Simone heard it, didn't stop, because that story, it wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been told to move aside, to step out of line, to prove they belonged. Now, because of her, the line was different, the gate was different, the air somehow felt different too. As she walked, a sign flashed above her on a digital banner, Welcome to Denver, where every journey matters. She didn't laugh, didn't scoff. She just pulled her hoodie forward, tightened the drawstrings, and kept walking, not toward a destination, but toward a continuation. Because the hoodie didn't stop at gate C12. It moved, carried, passed hands, became symbol, then signal that presence matters, that silence protects, that walking away is sometimes louder than standing your ground. The bus pulled into Eastwood, Georgia, just after sunset. Simone stepped off without hurry, the gravel crunching beneath her sneakers. No press, no welcome banner, just dusk, crickets, and the faint hum of porch radios echoing down the street. She had come home again, not for rest, not for applause, but to return something. Because the truth is, Simone hadn't built her stillness alone. She was taught it, raised in it, sharpened by a community that had always known how to survive beneath systems that pretended not to see them. And now she was here to plant the story in the soil it came from. The next morning, Simone visited Eastwood Middle School. The halls smelled like pencil shavings and cafeteria bread nostalgia wrapped in linoleum. Principal Harris met her at the front door, a tall black woman with locks tied back and an iron gaze softened by kindness. We cleared a room, she said. No speeches, just space. Simone nodded. They walked together down the hall, past classrooms filled with kids tapping at Chromebooks, whispering through math sheets, doodling in the margins of things. They reached room 212, a space usually used for testing. Today, it was a circle, no desks, just chairs, just people. The students came in slowly, middle schoolers awkward, sharp, too observant for their own peace. Some recognized her, most didn't. She liked it better that way. When they all sat down, Simone didn't introduce herself, didn't tell her story. Instead, she asked one question. When was the last time you were told to be quiet? One girl raised her hand. Yesterday, She said, I was talking during roll call. I wasn't even being loud. Another boy said, I get told to calm down even when I'm just excited. A third kid, quieter, looked at his shoes. I get sent out the room before I even speak. Simone nodded, then said something that shifted the air. They don't always mean your volume. Sometimes they mean your existence. They sat in that circle for an hour. No lessons, just voices, just truth. One kid asked if she ever yelled back. Simone shook her head. I didn't yell. I documented. Because a system built to ignore you will always listen to what it's scared to read. She pulled out her notebook, worn, frayed, full, held it up. This is where I kept everything they tried to bury. The kids leaned forward. She passed it around. Page by page. They flipped through stories, quotes, scribbled thoughts in hotel lobbies and back seats and gate lounges. It didn't look like power, but it felt like it. After the session, a student named Khalil caught up with her near the library. Ms. Carter, he asked, is silence like a weapon? She thought for a second. No. She said, it's a doorway. Most people never learn how to walk through it. But when you do, you realize it leads somewhere stronger than noise ever could. Khalil nodded. I think I'll try it. You won't always get it right, Simone said, but try anyway. That evening, Simone walked to the corner store where she used to buy Now and Laters after school. Same faded awning, same creaky door. Inside, the owner recognized her instantly. You back for good, he asked. No, just long enough, she replied. He slid a small envelope across the counter. No name. Been here a week. Kid dropped it off. Said it was for you. She opened it outside. Under the street lamp. Inside was a drawing. A girl in a hoodie. Notebook in hand. Feet planted like roots. At the top, in uneven pencil. Thank you for not yelling. Thank you for staying. Simone folded the paper slowly, placed it in her tote bag, right beside her notebook. Back at her father's house, she sat on the porch, journal in hand, pen resting gently between her fingers. The night was thick with summer. Cicadas droned like old clocks. And for the first time in a while, she let herself rest, not in retreat, but in continuance. Because movements don't always march. Sometimes they sit, they write, they remember. And that too is resistance. She scribbled one final note before going in for the night. They watched me walk. They thought I was leaving, but I was only making a path. The final morning was warm, not summer yet, but enough sun to remind you that the cold had passed. Simone Carter stood at the edge of her old street in Eastwood, Georgia. Same cracked pavement, same leaning mailboxes, same hush of a town waking up without rush. She wore the same hoodie, the one that had made headlines. The one they once used as a reason to remove her. Now it was just hers again. No symbol, no signal, just fabric and memory. She began to walk, not toward any destination, not away from anything either, just forward. A slow, even pace, shoes hitting sidewalk with rhythm. Not power, not defiance, just presence. That's what they never understood. She didn't walk to prove anything. She walked because that's how she moved through the world. One quiet, undeniable step at a time. As she passed the corner store, a boy on a bike looked up from his phone. He stopped pedaling. Hey, he said, you're the lady. Simone stopped. Which one, she asked. The one who didn't yell. He said, the one who wrote it all down. She smiled, nodded. Still writing. She said, he grinned, turned his bike, and kept riding. Further down the block, she passed the old barber shop. The door was open. Old men inside talking politics and football and how the world never listens until it's forced to. One of them waved, we see you. Baby, we see you. Simone tipped her chin in acknowledgement. Didn't stop. Because this walk wasn't about being seen, it was about remembering who she'd always been before the headlines, before the hearings, before the flight. Half a mile later, she reached the old bridge near the train tracks. That's where her father used to take her when she needed to think. They never talked much there, just sat, watched trains roar beneath them, imagined where they were going, talked with their silence. She stood there now, hand resting on the rusty railing. A breeze lifted the edge of her hoodie. She didn't fix it. Behind her, footsteps, soft, unhurried. She turned. A young woman, early 20s maybe, approached, hoodie on, notebook in hand. "Ms. Carter," she asked. Simone nodded once. "I read your story." The girl said, "I started writing mine." She held up the notebook like proof. Dog-eared, scribbled, alive. Simone didn't reach for it, just said, "Keep going, even when they look past you." Especially then. The girl nodded, turned around, walked back the way she came. Simone watched her. One more quiet force building in the world. She stayed at the bridge for an hour, didn't write, didn't scroll, just stood, still, because she knew what came next. And this time, she didn't need to narrate it. She had passed the baton. Back in town, news had already spread, not through media, not online, just mouths, whispers, that Simone was home, that the hoodie had returned. People didn't flood the streets. They didn't need to. They simply stood where they were, on porches, in doorways, near buses, at park benches, and they watched her walk because she wasn't marching. She was reminding. At one intersection, a small group of kids lined up, 4 of them, black, brown, 1 white, all in hoodies, not store-bought to match, just their own, zipped up, pulled tight. They didn't say a word. They just walked behind her, quiet, 1 step behind, then beside. No chants, no slogans, just footsteps. And when she looked over her shoulder, there were more. A mother with a stroller, a college kid with headphones, a janitor in work boots, all walking, all in rhythm. No one leading, no one following, just moving together. By the time they reached the school playground, a dozen people had joined. No plan, no signs, just presence. Simone stopped, turned, looked at each face. No one asked for a speech, and so she gave them the only thing she had always offered: stillness. She nodded, stepped off the path, let them keep walking, because this wasn't about her anymore. It never really had been. She sat on the bench by the swing set, notebook open, pen in hand, and wrote, "They thought the walk ended at the gate, but it only started with me." She closed the notebook, pulled her hood up, and smiled. Sometime, a revolution doesn't come with a microphone. It comes with a notebook, a gray hoodie, and a woman who refused to raise her voice because she knew the world would hear her anyway. Simone Carter didn't fight to be famous. She didn't perform pain for the cameras. She just walked through the fire with her silence intact and let the system burn itself down in the reflection of her stillness. And in doing so, she lit a path, not just for herself, but for every young person who's ever been pulled aside, talked down to, or told they don't belong. Now, that path is open, and the hoodie walks on. It walks in school hallways, on sidewalks, through airports, and in every space where someone once had to shrink to fit. Because Simone showed us you don't have to shout to be powerful. You just have to stand. And when you do, the world will move. If this story moved you, if it made you feel seen, understood, well, or inspired, then let the message walk a little further. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories just like this. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today, and don't forget to turn on the bell so you never miss a voice that speaks without needing to shout. This is Silent Power Stories, where the quiet ones don't get left behind, they lead. And remember, the next time someone underestimates you, don't yell. Just keep walking. They'll hear you.